I think one of the keystones to cultivating rock solid confidence is literally not taking anything personally, recognizing that all social interactions are products of cognition and social dynamic psychology, and very often we have a tendency to take these like situations very personally, and at the end of the day, they are really just not. When somebody says something to me that triggers me that I feel was uncalled for, unnecessary, just one of those comments that are maybe demeaning or designed to kind of knock you down and make you feel small. Those kinds of things can often derail us emotionally and send us into thinking spirals and cognitive tailspins. And the reason that happens is because we take it personally. We get triggered by what people say. We get this emotional reaction that comes out of our psychology because of our negative frame of our negative frame of reference, and then we feel like it's in a personal attack, and we either shrink down or make ourselves small, and that feeling stifles us. It stops us from performing in our optimal. It stops us from sharing our ideas and wanting to come forward and talk about our understandings or ideas about certain situations. And I think the question is, how do we stop being so shaken by what other people say? How do we regulate ourselves when we get triggered by other people, either by what they say or what they do? And the real mindset here, and really just insightful understanding, is realizing that it isn't personal. People treat you the way they treat you because of them, not because of you. And yes, you may do something that triggers something in them to act out in a particular way. But again, it's not personal. They're just perceiving your actions in a particular way, understanding it in a particular way through their own psychology, and responding in a certain way. So there are so many interpretation buffers that the behavior has to go through before it gets a reply. And very often in between those buffers, we can get mixed signals. Sometimes people take things too personally or more personally than what they should, and then they respond in certain ways. But truly, it is not a personal thing. It's not a personal thing. Even when people call you a loser or this, or they bully you in high school or bully you in corporate or whatever, man. When people give you shit and try and demean you in any kind of way, say nasty things to make you feel small, even in relationships where people take jabs at each other, just keep remembering that it's not personal. This person is acting and saying the things they are because of the current situation and their current psychology. But it has nothing to do with me, very little to do with me as an individual. Now, we've got to be careful. That's not a golden ticket to go and behave however we want and then just say, oh, well, it's all just perception. We do also have to take accountability for behavior. We have to be able to wisely observe the way our behavior makes other people react and feel. And we have to be mindful of that and mindful of them. And when we do cultivate a good practice in that way, when we are mindful of how our speech and behavior makes other people feel, then we can take accountability for ourselves in social situations. So when somebody turns around and does say something mean and nasty, we know that it's not us. We know that it's just them maybe having a bad day, maybe projecting some kind of psychological thing that has gone on in their life. There's many reasons behind why people behave the way they do. And, none of it's an excuse, but when we have a reason, we can intellectually empathize with the person in front of us. Instead of becoming offended and hostile and defensive, we can kind of take a more mature approach of de-escalation. And the best way to defuse a hostile person is just to pretend that they are not being hostile and just communicate with them as if they're not actually being angry to you, and kind of having this air that, oh no, yes, it's a very angry situation, but nobody's angry at one another, kind of thing. That's the best way to kind of de-escalate somebody's emotions. Because what happens in arguments is that somebody flares up, right? The other people around them, they perceive that flare up and then they flare back. And it just becomes this vicious back and forth cycle. And that's just the dynamics of an argument. But the best way to stop that cycle is you're going to have to do it. You have to be the one who's kind of like, okay, well, I'm not going to be reactive to the emotional outburst of it anymore. We're still going to have the conversation. Sure, if you want to scream and shout, that's fine. But I'm going to talk calmly. I'm going to, try my best not to bring emotions into it. And hopefully that de-escalates. And in the beginning, it doesn't always work. At first, it doesn't always work, especially in relationships. You'll find that these kinds of changes need practice, and they have to take time, and they have to become habitual. It may take a while for that person to start responding to you in a different way. They're not going to just respond differently right off the bat. And that's because you have to give them time for their own psychology to change. It takes a long time for us to change our ways, especially when we've been in those ways for a long time. But with practice and patience and persistence, change inevitably happens. It takes a long time for seeds to sprout, but eventually they do, and they grow out strong, and they bear fruit. When my girlfriend flips off at me, I know that it could be for a number of reasons. Maybe she's hormonal, maybe she's had a bad day at work, maybe this is just pent-up anger from a long compounded thing that's been happening in her life. I don't know where this anger's coming from. Maybe I'm the nearest outlet, and reactively, she's vipte at me. And a lot of guys just take it so personally. Don't talk to me like that. Who do you think you are? I don't care if you've had a bad day. But when we realize that it's not personal, bro, it's just a psychological reaction. When you realize that it's not personal, you get leverage to stage some kind of intervention in the situation. And instead of reacting with more fire and essentially pouring more fuel on the fire, you have the opportunity to create a safe space for this fiery, angry person to kind of lay down on. And you just got to give it time, and eventually the fire dies down. It always does. I mean, you check in counseling, people come in furious, and when you don't react in that same way and you don't egg them on with their emotions, they calm themselves down and regulate. But the thing is, we've got to stop taking it personally. It's never personal, man. It is never personal. People act the way they act because of them, not because of you. And yes, they may be triggered because of you, but unless you've done something to egg them on, then it's probably not you. And it's hard to not take it personally, because when anybody shouts at us or says something negative to us, or we have some kind of negative altercation, it doesn't make anybody feel good. So part of it is learning how to overcome our feelings. And as soon as those feelings come on, like, oh shit, she's angry because she doesn't love me anymore. She's angry because she hates my company, which is usually the insecure go-to. Okay, we've got to remind ourselves, no, it's not personal. It's not because of that. It's because of something that is happening in her life. There is something that has happened in her life that is causing her to be in this ugly mood. And it most likely isn't you. And if it is you, and you are a good person, then maybe you shouldn't be around that person's company. That's a hard thing, but if you've tried everything you possibly can and nothing works, then, it's either tolerance or unconditional acceptance or removing yourself from that environment. You even apply this philosophy not just to relationships, but to anything that happens to you in life. It's never personal. People say, oh no, why me? Why does this shit have to happen to fucking me all the time? What have I done to deserve this? It's got nothing to do with deserve. It's got nothing to do with deserve. You didn't do anything to deserve this. This is just the nature of this reality. Things happen in life, and we either interpret it as a good thing or a bad thing. When we interpret it as a bad thing, we often look for someone to blame. And when there's no evident cause, we blame ourselves. It always happens to me. It's always me. You don't realize, but you're blaming yourself for things that are not even your fault. So you stop taking life personally as well. Life isn't out to get you. Life is something that you experience. And if you're in a good mood, you'll deal with something in a certain way. If you're in a bad mood, you deal with that same thing in a different way. And we can apply that same foresight and insight into confrontational situations with other people.